Okay, so this is a beautiful Friday, and I'm over in central New Jersey and sort of the greater Princeton area, and here with my friend, fellow blogger Stephers, who blogs at A Piece of Mindful, and we just decided to spend this beautiful spring day outdoors. But she's a little shy on the camera stuff, so I'm going to do the talking. But we've been doing some sort of advanced intelligence on the area, and so what we have behind me is a lock on the Delaware and Raritan Canal. And if you follow me, you know that I'm really interested in the way cultural landscapes are interpreted and how history lays upon the land. So, the lock is an area that they would take these barges, coal barges that would transport Pennsylvania coal into the New York City area. And this predated the railroads. So this is 1830s, had a relatively short window before the railroads took over. But the locks are still extant, and you can see that behind me. And then beyond the lock itself is more of a natural stream. So we're going to be going down and setting some intentions upon the natural waters of New Jersey, which were sort of in the epicenter of the frequency stories. And so I'm just going to sort of pivot around. Behind me, you'll see that's the lock tender's house back there, and then next to it is a little building, and that little building is actually part of the toll taking, so toll and telegraph. And so that's interesting to me in our story today, because it reminds me of looking forward to transportation, supply chains, energy systems, and the money that's attached to that, and doing those transactions, and that's sort of part of it. So, the communication element is there's the toll, which is the payment. So if you use the service of the lock, you need to pay the toll to pay for the infrastructure and upkeep of the infrastructure. But then you also have the telegraph, and the telegraph is the communication signaling. And one of the things that I just uncovered, I think yesterday or the day before, in looking at sort of telegraph history, because oftentimes the telegraph wires went along with the railroad corridors and these existing transportation corridors, that Western Union was one of the central enterprises in that space. And this gentleman, his name is Ezra Cornell, and he was doing one of the early contracts for Samuel Morse, who had gotten a contract to install a wired system between DC and Baltimore, which is, one of the early rail corridors. But for some reason, I think they were trying to put the cabling underground, and he was having a really tough time with it. And then Ezra Cornell figured out some way of creating a plow that would both create a channel for the wiring systems and then to install the wire. And so he had this invention, and it was quite innovative, and he sort of went into collaboration with Samuel Morse and ended up being very involved in the telegraph industry, and then later Western Union. And so if we imagine what's coming with this world of smart contracts and digital identities and the metaverse, is that pretty much everything in the world interacting with people and interacting with smart environments is going to involve some sort of micropayment systems, right? Like a mini toll for your existence in the world. And so to have the toll keeper's house there, that exemplifies moving forward, almost 200 years later, the micropayment blockchain toll system tied to your digital identity. But then additionally, there's the telegraph piece, which is the digital payment system. And so Ezra Cornell actually went on to be one of the co-founders of Cornell University in upstate New York, and which has always prided itself on technological innovation. That's sort of one of the features of that school. And then additionally, now Cornell had an extended satellite campus called Cornell Technion, which is a technology school in Israel. And they set up shop on Roosevelt Island, and they were sort of a catalyst for a number of players who are connected to the Commons project, Common Pass, which is digital identity linked to health data. And a lot of that health data is going to be your digital identity tied to your health status and tied to your medical passporting systems. So as we start today here in Princeton, we're going to do a number of different site visits, but a lot of it has to do with figuring out what is the story, And the story is about transactions and payments in the built environment, and somewhat about geofencing and ease of movement and transporting goods and services, which at this point, we're looking behind me at this lock where they were transporting coal, but the new supply chain element is going to be data, interoperable data tied to predictive analytics and digital identity. And so I just find it really interesting to sort of look through the currents of history and see how they lay upon the land. And so I think it's very fitting that we start the day today with the toll booth, a telegraph booth, and understanding what that means for metaverse smart contracts and digital payments. Okay, so now we've moved down a little bit from the toll booth. We're at this spot on the Millstone River, and I don't know if you can see behind me, but there's a mill house here, and those mills go back to like the early, I think maybe the late 17th century, like definitely through the 18th century. So those are sort of the early, man's domination over nature and the natural systems, right? And there's a beautiful bridge. I don't know that you'll be able to see it from here, but it's like this 4-arched masonry bridge. And so I guess that's probably, there's a metaphor in there, right? Like, what's the bridge? What is the bridge out of, I think maybe we feel like we're stuck on some sort of island of, but we're not. Like, we can get out, we can cross. The bridge is there. We just have to understand that the bridge is there and find our way to it. So the bridge is important. And as we walked up, we just saw a beautiful bullfrog. And this bullfrog, I'm saying, was like probably like the size of a luncheon plate. Beautiful, green and brown, and it didn't hop away when we were there. So I take that as a good sign, because I think we were looking it up, and frogs are a symbol of positive transformation, all right? Because their whole life is the positive transformation, but they're also entities that are connected to environmental contamination, because their skin is all exposed all the time, and so they're there's been a lot of research around what has happened to the amphibians and the frogs and the beings that we're sharing this world with. And we're behind, the river is really high right now. It's really rushing. And, I put out a couple days ago for requests for some intentions. And, driving here on the highway and getting to this particular spot, just the whole fields are aglow with dandelions right now. We are in the height of dandelion season, and they smell so beautiful. And I know, like, last year people were really excited about the dandelions. This year it feels like either my reach is a little diminished or it's a bit like pulling teeth. But I have some intentions to set with these dandelions, and I'm going to set them afloat on this beautiful skunk leaf, cabbage leaf, which we saw, and I think it's quite lovely. And so I'm going to set them all together on this leaf and put it adrift in the water. Probably there's a little rapids down there, so it won't go for very far before it all tumps over, but then it'll spread out beyond. And then we also have some homeopathic remedies for the water. And this one, as you know, Stephers has done a lot of research about graphene and nanoparticles and nano machine systems and all of the defense contracting around that and how that all works. So we've got a little graphene oxide, which came just in time for today's special event. And then we also have some broader environmental contamination homeopathy. And so I think it's important, when we were talking about up at the telegraph house and the toll house, about communication. And and I have this short video that someone did, which was really a lovely job, about information, that the universe is made up of information, and there's transmitters and receivers, and there's understood languages. And so, I'm communicating now, whoever of you is going to be on the other side of this thing, hopefully you'll understand how to translate my message. But it's also happening on a biochemical level. And so Central New Jersey is actually the home of a lot of major chemical and pharmaceutical companies, going way back to the 18th century and 19th century, definitely. And is still home to a lot of headquarters of these like high-level scientific research. And the paradigm is definitely still within the domination principle of, we will engineer the world with our created materials, and then we will put them out into the environment, and you will figure out what comes next, right? You will figure out what, we will at some point mitigate the harm that is done, right? And then often that harm, the chemicals interfere with the way our bodies respond, the way with the water systems, with the trees, and harm comes, and then they're going to sell us the fix to the harm, right? But without actually stopping to realize that maybe there are some ways that we shouldn't have introduced the harm in the first place. So I think the communication and biochemical communication is very important. And beyond the chemical, there's also frequency. So we're going to be talking a little bit later about electromagnetic frequency here and in this area as well, because there's a lot of research also going into high-level defense research in the Princeton area around frequency and electromagnetism. So I'm going to just take this moment to read the intentions that were sent my way. There was one that came in at the last minute, and Stephers was generous enough to print them out before we met up. So that one is still not there, and since I'm using my phone for video, I will just have to riff on the last one that came in. But essentially it was, may we peacefully and with love pull the plug on the Global Brain Project, that life and nature are sacred, and that life will prevail in this. So I think that's a good way to start off, and thank you for that. So I've got that, and then so I have another one. We give thanks for all of nature. I deny artificial existence and synthetic life. We are beings of the natural world and will remain engaged with nature. Through this connection, may we be cleansed of lower energies and lower intentions. Okay. May we all be free from suffering and have natural happiness. May everyone awaken to the wrongs committed against us under the guise of common good, and may we gain the strength and desire to communicate our thoughts out to those around them with love. Let it not darken us. The truth, life, is bigger than everything and will hold us. Let it strengthen us. May we live it. Nature will win because nothing is bigger. We are nature. The rest is a lie, and somehow it will all crumble. Let's live in this truth, fully and strong. Now, this was one that was sent to me a bit earlier, but I thought it was very perfect for today. It's a quote from Job in the Bible, Job 5:12. He disappointeth the devices of the craft, so their hands cannot perform their enterprise. I like that a lot. I'm going to say that again. He disappointeth the devices of the craft, so their hands cannot perform their enterprise. And so I think that's what we imprint for those who have intentions against natural life, that craft will not prevail. Their hands will not be able to complete their task. And then this is the last one. These troubles are but a digital dream. Let us take off our shoes, put our bare feet on the grass, shake off their nightmare of disconnect and austerity. And as the sons and daughters of life, we will be washed clean of these dark intentions. And that one's actually mine. And I think I'm gonna take off my shoes for this minute. I'm right here on the gravel, but I do want to connect because water is central to this program. I've got this little, let's see. I'm gonna unplug still getting the hang of all of these thingies. Here, I'm gonna set this down. Maybe you guys will be able to see me. Maybe not. So we've got the dandelions, all right? It's cold, but feels good. Communication. It's our first intention for the day. Okay, so we are out on just a bit above the Millstone River, about half a mile up, and actually the river there's a mill dam, and it backs up and creates this lake, and this lake is known as Carnegie Lake or Lake Carnegie, and it was created in 1906. It was created specifically to provide a place for the students of Princeton University to row crew, and you can see there's sort of a modest boathouse behind me. And they solicited money from Andrew Carnegie to create this lake. And again, for pretty superficial level purposes, I read it. You know, there wasn't a real need for this lake, but they created it so that they could row on it. And among the people who have used this lake over its lifetime included Albert Einstein, who was on faculty at the Institute for Advanced Studies, and often during his time in Princeton, he would come and boat on this lake. I don't think he rowed crew, but he did have a boat and he came out. So in 1906, when the lake was dedicated, it was, in addition to Andrew Carnegie, President Woodrow Wilson came. So, and again, that's League of Nations sort of setting the stage for, you know, global peace movement in the United Nations and all of that. So Woodrow Wilson was here and Andrew Carnegie, and at the time the students sang him a bit of a song, and I'm not great with the singing part, but I can read you the words. It said, "Carnegie, Carnegie, he's giving us a lake. You can hear the breakers break. Carnegie, Carnegie, Andy, Andy, you're a dandy. Carnegie." All right, so I have a little dandelion I'm going to toss in the lake to transmute a bit of that Andy, Andy, you're a dandy, and I think that's useful. But before we close out on this, I want to mention that this reminded me of another lake. You know, Carnegie is Carnegie Steel in Pittsburgh. There's quite a bit of the Global Brain Project that started in Pittsburgh, and I have a sense that really it predated even Oliver Reiser's work at Pitt in the 1940s, but my gut tells me that there's something about extractivism and energy and the oil industry, which was what built the Rockefellers, who weren't so much in Pittsburgh. He was in Cleveland, but then also there was a lot of oil and steel and coal that was connected in Pittsburgh itself. And so, you know, the Carnegie legacy was built into remaking the education system. So originally it was around the Carnegie unit of having students in school so that you could train them for the new version of industry, which was originally factories and then later became knowledge work, and now is going to be that we're supposed to be cyborgs. So that's all linked into Carnegie and the Carnegie libraries and the Carnegie's ties to public television and the Carnegie's ties to the National Center on Education and the Economy, Mark Tucker in Rochester, New York. So that's all Carnegie's. Also in Pittsburgh, you've got the Pitcairn family that I went to recently, Pittsburgh Plate Glass. And he both, the patriarch of the Pitcairn family, I believe his name might have been Joseph, and Andrew Carnegie were both part of the Swedenborgian Church. Now, Emanuel Swedenborg, he was Swedish, surprise, surprise, and lived in the late 18th century and was sort of a scientist philosopher, but had this idea that he was sort of wandering around in these realms, these outer realms. And so the fact that both Andrew Carnegie and the head of the Pitcairn family, who are both Scottish immigrants, so I'm thinking there might be a bit of Scottish rite thrown in there, is quite interesting in terms of esoterics and energies. And then you've got things like Westinghouse, all baked into the Pittsburgh area that later became ultimately the Carnegie Mellon banking family. That was another important Pittsburgh area. So you've got a lot of wealth in Pittsburgh, a lot of philanthropy that's designing society and programming society to be accommodating to the industries that you're on offer, many of which are polluting the environment and degrading humanity. And then later, all of these well-connected people actually ended up setting up a hunt and fishing club a ways outside of Pittsburgh, the South Fork Hunting Club. And what they did was they used an area that it was above the city of Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And there had been a reservoir made for the water for the town. And when they made their hunt club, they decided to sort of mess around with the dam and cut the top off of it to make it wide enough so that they could have a road to get their hunting and fishing camp, and then installed sort of a fish ladder thing for them, for their own entertainment purposes, right? Well, then there was quite a bit of terrible rainstorm, something that is not unknown here in Princeton, some weather going on, and then eventually that dam failed, and the city of Johnstown, Pennsylvania was entirely flooded. It was the worst humanitarian disaster in the United States, I think from a flooding standpoint at least, in the 19th century. Over 2,000 people died, thousands of homes were lost. It was sort of one of the first big outings for the Red Cross and Clara Barton, and it was part of this whole legacy of sort of Western Pennsylvania history. And everyone was sort of looking back on these rich guys out of Pittsburgh and their, hunting enterprises and what that had meant for this town. And so, like, just bringing this back to present day with the takeover of both the education space and also medical education, because what I found out was Abraham Flexner, before he started being connected with the Rockefellers, actually the Flexner Report was prepared for the Carnegie Education Institute. So that had a Carnegie connection before it went to the Rockefellers. Before it evolved into Rockefeller medicine, the Flexners had ties to Carnegie. Was that in Johnstown, Pennsylvania is actually the site of Problem Solutions. And Problem Solutions, it's sort of in an industrial office park outside of town. And they're largely a defense contractor that has developed XAPI technology, or tin can API technology, that is going to be collecting all of the wearables and screen-based that are not computing, phone, tablet-based, virtual reality, data collection for digital badges for the metaverse and for your education system. So all of this is sort of looping back through history here and linking Carnegie, but Carnegie is not just hanging out in Pittsburgh. Clearly his reach is very broad, very much linked to the global peace movement, the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, that's now connected to the Japan Moonshot Project. And but it's often situated in sort of lovely, bucolic settings, right, where people go boating and express their intentions on the water. And some of those intentions are frivolous boating, and then some of them are very dangerous floods. And so I guess I'm gonna just take my dandelion down to the water here, and I've got a dandelion, here we go. And then also, and I didn't get a shot of this before I left, but I have a bit of a little tag. There's a young child who I met in upstate New York last year, and I took some dandelion, B.F. Skinner's area, and it turned out to be the same town, Susquehanna, Pennsylvania, where Joseph Smith interpreted the Mormon tablets, or the golden tablets for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so he sent me the dandelions in a beautiful envelope with some dandelion drawings on it, and this one says love. And so I've cut this out. I left one of the dandelions over at the Millstone Creek, and I'm going to leave another one here on the rosebush. But so I guess we shall transmute. We shall transmute the intentions of Andy the dandy into something that is more natural and attuned to real energetics, and not what perhaps Albert Einstein and his physicist cohorts had planned at the Institute for Advanced Studies, with like manipulating us somewhere in the metasphere as particle physics. So here we go. Andy dandy transmute. All right, and I'm just going to take this over and hang it over here on the rose bush here, and we'll let it wave. It's kind of windy today, so here we go. It's hanging, so we've got that. So thanks everybody. Next stop. Okay, so we're now over at the Institute for Advanced Study. We're maybe not quite a mile outside of the town of Princeton. We drove over from the lake, and much of the way we drove down Nassau Street, which I think of as the Bahamas, but evidently the original origin of the name of Nassau is a a part of the Rhineland in Germany. We drove through Princeton, very, very precious. Nassau Hall in Princeton was one of the largest stone buildings in the state of New Jersey at the time. I guess briefly served as the US Capitol for 4 months. And so, now we're outside of town. It's this whole campus is sort of very open, trees. You'll see in the background that's Fold Hall, which is the main building, although there's some more modern additions. And this campus was created in 1930 by Abraham Flexner. And again, we talked about him a bit over by the lake, that he did the study on medical education for Carnegie and later collaborated with Rockefeller. And during the late 1920s, the Bamberger family, a brother and sister, they had a new department store chain in the Newark, New Jersey area, and right before the stock market crash, they sold out to Macy's, and so they had sort of a pile of money, and they decided that Mr. Bamberger didn't have any children, and they wanted to put it towards an educational project. So this is what they came up with, this Institute for Advanced Study, and they approached Abraham Flexner to run it, and he was the director for quite a number of years at the beginning. And with the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, at that point, quite a few prominent scientists, refugee scientists, were looking to relocate, and quite a number of them, including Einstein, came here to Princeton. And they came to the Institute for Advanced Studies. And it's not affiliated with the university, it's just geographically located in the town of Princeton. So, we're part of the reason we're here today is just to, we're dealing with sort of navigating, understanding this global brain project that Julius Stolman started, and along with Oliver Reiser and Fritz Kunst, and looking at the role of physics, theoretical physics, and sort of radio frequency, and I guess alternate versions of reality. And one of the things that Albert Einstein worked on a lot and later in his life here included this unified field theory. And so trying to sort of put this all together is a challenge, and I'm not saying that we certainly have it, but I think there are a lot of elements to the Second World War and the Cold War and the industry of atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, atomic energy, atomic medicine specifically, and how they all go together, and the use of those weapons against Japan to rebuild Japan, which later eventually Japan would become a highly technological society, an innovator in humanoid robotics, and now a leader in this Japan Moonshot project. So in the lead up to the Second World War, Albert Einstein and one of his students, his name was Leo Szilard, and he was one of the Hungarian Martian physicists, they wrote a letter essentially to encourage the beginning of what would become the Manhattan Project, to investigate the use of atomic research towards defense. And they gave this letter. Einstein wrote it in consultation with Szilard to a gentleman. His name is Alexander Sachs. And so Sachs was an advisor to FDR, and he took this the Einstein-Szilard letter, and essentially, within short order, FDR gave the go-ahead to start doing the atomic energy research and weapons research, and to get the Manhattan Project underway. Okay, so you have the Einstein-Szilard letter. After they dropped the bombs, a lot of the scientists that worked on these weapons had regrets, including Robert Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer became the head of this institute here for a number of years after the Second World War. And so you had a small group of the scientists, atomic energy scientists, who were essentially trying to address the issue of the Cold War buildup of weapon systems, and really advocating for the use of their scientific research, but their use of it towards energy and also medicine. And that was part of the Einstein-Szilard letter that was presented to FDR, was he was talking about not just defense, but that this research would be used for energy, but also for medical purposes. And so you need to understand that the Institute was originally gotten underway by Abraham Flexner, and Flexner was the person who was implementing the Rockefeller medicine makeover, right? A makeover towards credentialed, technologically oriented medical systems of, largely pharmaceuticals among other medical interventions, and maybe not so much about healing people. So Flexner was central to this. And so I guess it's not super surprising that the issue of using this atomic nuclear physics, theoretical physics research towards medicine would be happening here. And so now I think as we move forward into the metaverse with this idea of digital twinning and nanotechnology, nanorobotics, living life as cyborgs, that it's all coming full circle. And so maybe the weapons, on the one hand, were the atomic weapons used on Japan, and they were used to sort of put everyone in their place for the coming years about what was going to happen, that everyone needed to sit tight, pour a lot of money in defense contracting, pour a lot of money into weaponizing the atmosphere, and keep everyone in very, very deep trauma and fear for a few decades, actually more than a few decades. And then eventually it would loop around, and that we would all sort of, those elements that would come back together, all of the research that was done both in the US and in the Soviet Union and in China, and we would end up moving towards the completion of the Global Brain Project. And so when we first got here, I'm gonna flip this video around in a second, but so we were trying to figure out a place to set our little intention. And I've often said that I was looking for a global peace movement of mothers against AI. And since then, I still agree with that idea. But I know the idea is maybe not to present yourself as a direct opposition, but sort of a transmutation, right? And to go around, not to confront, because that's what they're looking for, is a direct confrontation, but sort of an encircling, right? And so when we came up to this space, which is interesting because they were just filming actually a new film by the gentleman who created the Tenet movie on Robert Oppenheimer, I think called American Prometheus, maybe, or something like that, or maybe that's the book. But it's about Oppenheimer. In because the building behind us looks pretty much like it did when the Oppenheimer was here in the 40s. Where was I going with that? But so anyway, so not in direct opposition, because that's what they want, but to come at things from an encircling sort of way. So we show up and we park and we're looking for a place to set our intention, and there is this large piece of art and it's like a black hole, honestly. This piece of art, it like sucks all the life out of this area, and we're in this open meadow with beautiful sycamore trees, and it's just this black piece of metal. And so we walk up and I said, I think that needs some attention there. Stephers, I think we should situate ourselves around this piece of art installation. And it turns out it was called The New Piece. The new piece being P-I-E-C-E, like a piece of the puzzle. But I think actually what it speaks to is this idea of using technological systems in a globally connected age to assert peace, assert a global new world order peace, but not through humanity becoming more self-aware and empathetic, but actually through an enforced peace that would happen through nanoelectronics and frequency modification, and that's what's coming with the peace. So I'm going to flip the camera around and sort of just do a walk around this installation. It was originally designed in 1966, and then they only made it as a concept, like a charcoal drawing, and then a plywood model. And then in 1980, for the 50th anniversary of the Institute being opened in 1930, and in honor of Einstein, this piece was fabricated in metal and installed. And so, as we go around, we've made this small intention with dandelions and sticks that were here, but then there were also these evergreen leaves scattered all about, and there are no evergreen trees anywhere close to here. So I'm looking, and there were too many for it just to be like a child that maybe picked them and wandered over and dropped them on the ground. There were quite a few, so we incorporated those, and we think maybe it might have had something to do with the filming, but I think the idea of an evergreen intention is really lovely. And we incorporated dandelions, we incorporated geodes that Stepher brought from their collection. I used sticks, and it says AI piece in sticks, and then I put lavender around it, and we have some offerings that people have sent. And then we ended up surrounding, because initially Stephers said, well, maybe we should surround the sculpture, and it's quite sizable. And I'm thinking, I don't think we have enough dandelions or time to surround the whole thing. But conveniently, someone left us some wonderful sticks, these sycamore branches that had fallen. So we've surrounded the sculpture to contain its energy. And I will say, I'm going to take a break when I walk around, but there's a quote that I want to read when I'm talking about the piece of sculpture that has to do with its resonant energy. And so my dear friend Deepti is in India. We've talked recently about sort of the AI mechanized overlay that's being installed over, our natural, access to the global thought forms of energetics that we have. And what she was saying is that in India, their parliament building has since forever been round. It's always been a round building, and that now they're actually installing a whole new program where it is cut off and it is squared off. And so I think we need to contrast the natural forms of the curves and the irregularities of nature with this hulking new piece. And if we're imagining global peace looking like HAL from 2001, a Space Odyssey, as some sort of blockchain global computer brain, it might be embodied by something like this. Not quite a black rock, but close. It definitely channels that. So, okay, so I'm going to walk around this. This is the new piece, 1966, executed in 1980. And this is a description of this object. So you can see, it's in a meadow. There's this lovely meadow around, right? And then you've got, ta-da, dodecahedron thing. This is how they describe it. New piece, 1966, at first appears to be a cube drawn in perspective. Smith constructed the shape from 12-sided modular units called rhomboidal dodecahedrons, muscular and monolithic, yet minimal and straightforward. The sculpture gives the viewer, as one early critic wrote, a disquieting sensation, as if movement around the piece releases its potential energy. So I'll just say that again. Muscular and monolithic, yet minimal and straightforward, the sculpture gives the viewer, as one early critic wrote, a disquieting sensation, as if movement around the piece releases its potential energy. And so I'm just going to walk around, and you can sort of see that we've got our sticks, our sycamore branches, so we're disrupting whatever little energetic field it's got going on. I will say we also added I put some salt around the base, because Deepti's always telling me that salt is really good. And it's interesting because this area is super schlucky. It's very moist, and the Nassau, actually, I think the original word had to do with sort of a moist meadow. So this is the piece itself. It's quite, not welcoming. You can see it sort of sucks up all the energy. And then this is our offering, and you can see we've got the geodes there. And then we have you can see the greenery that was dropped here, and we don't know why. We'll have to look for it in the movie, in the Oppenheimer movie. And this abundance of dandelions. And then just to sort of show it all off, we've got the sticks. And so it says AI peace. So we come in peace. That is our intention. We come in peace, and we're dealing with the after effects of theoretical physics, and we're trying to figure out how to navigate that with dandelions and set some intentions that will carry us through to the next phase, so the next group of folks can take up the baton. But it's interesting, and we've had a beautiful day out here. Okay, so this is the last stop of the day. And on the way home, I wanted to drop in on West Windsor Township, New Jersey. I'm in actually a park in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, and this is the site of the the setting of the remake of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds that was done as a radio play with a very young Orson Welles in 1938. Now, the book was written by H.G. Wells in 1898. He's a British science fiction author, originally trained in biology and espoused very closely sort of a socialist standpoint. He was a futurist. He had a lot of very spot-on concepts about what the future might hold, and brought up a number of ethical dilemmas about that. He actually, one of his books, A World Set Free, contemplated the idea of atomic weapons, and he also had a concept for a global brain. So those are all very interesting. He was quite, Winston Churchill was very much influenced by H.G. Wells's work. And in 1938, Orson Welles had a weekly radio broadcast, and The War of the Worlds was broadcast as a radio drama on October 30th, 1938. And a gentleman, I believe his name was Harold Koch, who was Kingston, New York raised a screenwriter, educated at Bard College. He rewrote H.G. Wells' story as essentially a radio drama. And he and Wells sort of put it together that it would be an hour-long program with sort of smooth jazz orchestra, and then it would be punctuated by various interruptions from people on the ground here at Grover's Mill about Martians landing. There's a capsule, and they were, taking on the New Jersey National Guard, and essentially, they didn't say at the beginning that it was made up, that it was just a radio play. They made it sound as though it was actually happening, and they modeled it after the radio coverage of the Hindenburg explosions, the blimp that happened in New Jersey. And so they were using that model and remaking a sort of reality TV in the making, right? But it was radio. This was a radio broadcast. And so that the monument that's behind me was commemorated or sort of put together in the 50th anniversary. The lighting is not great here, but you can sort of see what they have going on. There's the Martian landing with the tentacles, evidently in the radio program, which was only an hour long, so it didn't go on forever. They said that ultimately the aliens were done in by a pathogen. Go figure, right? I think it's really important and interesting because we're really not far from Princeton, New Jersey. And on the way over, it was about a 15-minute drive. We drove past SRI International, which is an East Coast output of Stanford Research Institute in California. It was originally a company called the Sarnoff Corporation, which was a spinoff of RCA, which was radio. And the focus of Sarnoff, they had done a lot of innovative technology around color television, electron microscopy, and liquid crystal displays. And so again, we're looking at navigating a world, right? Navigating information in the world, media that is being managed in various processes. It's being managed through high technology. It's being managed through entertainment. Sometimes what you're being told may or may not be accurate as to what's actually happening. And I know with regard to the War of the Worlds broadcast in 38, people were really, really upset. I think part of it, they said they were attacking New York City, so people got up in arms. And I think more and more today, we're trying to sort of figure out, wow, well, how could people be fooled? And back then, really, the method of national communication was through the radio broadcast. So that was frequency and that was programming. And again, it was sort of at the end, it was like joke, haha. This was like an early Halloween program. So, nudge, nudge, please forgive us. It was just all meant to be a joke. But increasingly these days, with augmented reality, virtual reality, information control systems, whether that is through the fake news, the overt propagandas, the suppression of information, the information management, that communication more and more is being shredded. And it's not just the things that you hear like would be coming out of a radio, but it would be things that we're literally being able to see, quote unquote, through digital technologies that are being developed through like computer graphics interfaces, CGI, literally using CAD, computer assisted design, aided design, to remake the world according to the story that you want to tell to accomplish the ends that you want to accomplish. And for the most of us, regular people are not uniquely in control of those tools. I mean, a lot of people may have jobs using those tools, but they're not the ones who are necessarily getting to make up the stories. And so I think that's really important to think about when we consider, you know, frequency. There's a Department of Energy lab nearby Princeton too, like I think plasmonics. Like, what story are you living in, right? And to what end? And this story agitated a lot of people. Evidently there was a water tank that someone came out and shot because in the dark they thought it looked like a Martian. And you know, we're antenna, right? We're water beings, we're bioelectrical water beings that are processing information, always, all kinds of information that we're aware of with our five senses, and then other information that we may not be aware of because it's beyond what we normally understand as the senses that we. Sorry, I must have bumped it off. But I was saying, like, information that we're aware of through our senses and information that we're not so aware of. And you know, they manipulate people. And so you need to really be grounded in your own truth, in your own reality. I can't promise that you will never be manipulated, but I think if you have that framework, you'll be less subject to manipulation, and you'll be able to call it out earlier if you wander in, which we always will. And I guess that's just sort of the message for the day from Grover's Mill, New Jersey, West Windsor Township. The frequencies out there are pretty intense, guys. The weather's beautiful, but the frequencies are intense, and the stories that they're trying to push on humanity are not necessarily stories of healing. So I think we need more healing. I think we need less drama. We certainly need fewer Martian aliens and energetic interventions in the universe. We need less defense contracting, maybe less high technology, and definitely more dandelions. So, you know, that's all I got for the day. That's Princeton. It looks beautiful on the surface, as many of these places. It's very posh. Seems a world apart from a lot of the trauma that the research being done at these institutions lifts up and puts out into the world. These people are pretty sheltered from it, I would think. But in the end, we're all connected. So what we put out is what we get back. So try to navigate the energy fields as best you can. All right, bye. So I'm going to just do a little bit of a close-up of the monument. This was done at the 50th anniversary. So you've got the Martians coming down. You've got Orson Welles, October 30th, 1938, Grover's Mill, doing the radio program. And then you have the traumatized family in the radio. And again, RCA, Radio Corporation of America, is central in all of this. They were, I believe, an extension out of the Marconi America program, and then ultimately some of the RCA stuff ended up in Sarnoff Corporation. So they're terrified. And then you've got the bottom. It says on the evening of October 30th, 1938, Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater presented a dramatization of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, as adapted by Howard Koch. This was to become a landmark, a broadcast in history-provoking, continuing thought about media responsibility, social psychology, and civil defense. For a brief time, as many as 1 million people throughout the country believed that Martians had invaded the Earth, beginning with Grover's Mills, New Jersey. Okay, I couldn't help myself. On the way back to get back out to Route 1, I dropped by and I saw the SRI International site. So it says no through traffic, but you can sort of see it in the distance. And I mentioned that a little bit in the storytelling that I was doing about Grover's Mill, that this SRI International was previously connected to the Sarnoff Corporation. And David Sarnoff was trained in signals intelligence, and he was sort of in on the ground floor with mass media communication in the early 1930s. So there was a Marconi telegraph area where there was a Marconi telegraph in Rutgers, and Albert Einstein, when he came to Princeton, they were touring around, and Sarnoff was connected, and then eventually the American Marconi merged with RCA, and Sarnoff joined in that organization, and then eventually was able to sort of leverage mass media communication instead of signal, like media one person to one person, that it was mass so that you could project out to many people at once. And I think one of his earliest programs, he arranged a boxing fight to be broadcast, and tens of thousands of people were listening in on the radio to that broadcast. And so that was sort of his foot in the door. Eventually he had connections to RKO Films, and he saw the connection between motion pictures and sound and that mass media potential. And then beyond that, he ultimately became connected to something that became NBC. And so the Sarnoff Corporation was actually involved in a lot of technological research around color televisions, as I mentioned before, and also electron microscopes. So it was sort of vision and video and file compression, and these are all the kinds of things in semiconductors that are going to run the metaverse. So eventually Sarnoff Corporation merged with SRI, which was based in California, and now they go by SRI International behind me. This is this New Jersey office, which is outside Princeton. It's essentially halfway between Princeton and West Windsor, Grover Mill, where the War of the World stuff happened. So I'm adding this into the mix because I do think that us navigating reality, understanding how that there are people who have access to sophisticated technologies, many of whom are military, because David Sarnoff was trained in the military and signals intelligence, to be able to influence our minds through the information that is conveyed to us through various media, whether that is a radio and sound, a big picture motion film that is in a theater, whether it's your TV that's in your living room that's a color television, and then eventually it's going to be your virtual reality headset. And then as these devices, these semiconductors, smart materials are recording us, so now it's not just outward projecting, but it's reciprocal communication. And so our reactions are being fed back into the loop, and it's cybernetic. So then they know, based on how we react, what to feed to us next, to essentially construct reality around us through digital media. And and that has huge implications, not just for entertainment purposes, but also because that's being fed into everything around education and training and all of this sort of thing. So I'm kind of surprised there's like traffic going in here. It's late on a Friday afternoon. But again, I just wanted to point out this SRI International, and to take the opportunity to say it's all about the story, folks. Can you tell a compelling story? Can you enrapture and enthrall people in your story? And the people who can do that have a lot of power. And there's a lot of pretty outrageous stories out there right now, and I guess you could consider that I'm telling you a story. My story I don't find is particularly outrageous, but take everything with a grain of salt and navigate your reality your own way.